Thomas had grown used to the silence. For 10 long years, the only sounds echoing across his sprawling Texas ranch were the soft whinnies of horses, the creak of old wood, and the whispering wind across the plains. He didn't mind. Silence had become his companion since the day he buried his wife. The days passed in routine mending fences, feeding livestock, brushing his old mare Sadie. That late afternoon, everything seemed the same. Until it wasn't. Dark. Clouds loomed over the horizon, swallowing the sun in a smoky swirl. The air grew heavy. Thomas, brushing hay from his sleeves, glanced up. He smelled the rain before he heard it. It came fast, thick sheets slapping against the barn roof, turning dust to mud in minutes. The radio crackled on the workbench behind him, a weather alert fading in and out. He clicked it off. He'd lived through worse. He was heading back toward the house when something strange caught his eye near the gate. A white blur, moving nostigaring. He squinted through the downpour. A woman. She was walking in the storm, drenched head to toe, the long train of her gown trailing like a ghost through the mud. A wedding dress. His heart kicked in his chest. Hey, he shouted, boots splashing through the puddles as he ran. The woman reached the porch steps, took one more trembling step, then collapsed. Thomas dropped to his knees beside her. Her lips were blue, her skin clammy and pale. She wasn't conscious. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. A pulse thin, but there. Thank God. With surprising strength for a man his age, he scooped her up and carried her inside. Rainwater pooled. At the doorway behind them, he laid her gently on the couch, heart pounding. The fire had gone out hours ago. He lit a match with shaking hands and coaxed the embers back to life. Then he wrapped her in an old wool blanket and set a kettle on the stove. She stirred after a while. Her eyes fluttered open wide, terrified, confused. You're safe now, Thomas said gently, kneeling beside her. Can you tell me your name? Her lips barely moved. Emily. She said nothing more. Every time he asked where she came from, what happened, she looked away. So he stopped asking. For now, keeping her warm and alive was enough. That night, Thomas sat in his old recliner across from the couch, watching the flames dance. The storm outside howled and slammed against the windows, but inside, a fragile peace had settled. He looked at the woman, her dress still damp and torn. Mascara streaked down her cheeks. Fingers curled into the blanket like a frightened child. She was no older than his own daughter would have been. 10 years alone. And suddenly something else had dropped, a soaked bride on his doorstep. He didn't know who she was or why she ran, but one thing was certain. Something had changed the moment she collapsed on his porch. And in his heart, buried under years of grief and dust, something had begun to stir. The fire crackled softly in the old stone hearth, casting warm light on the worn wooden floors and faded curtains of Thomas's ranch house. The storm still raged outside, wind howling like a lost soul across the plains, but inside, it was quiet, strangely so. Thomas sat at the edge of a chair pulled close to the couch, his calloused hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. Though he hadn't taken a sip, his eyes never left her face. She was awake now, barely, wrapped tightly in a thick wool blanket, her soaked wedding dress still clinging to her beneath it. She blinked slowly at the ceiling beams, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Her hair was plastered to her face, makeup streaked by rain and tears. Thomas waited, not wanting to startle her. She looked like a deer caught in a trap, frightened, fragile, and unsure whether to run or collapse again. Finally, her lips parted. Where am I? You're safe, Thomas said softly. You collapsed on my porch. I brought you in. My name's Thomas. This is my ranch. She nodded slowly, trying to sit up but grimacing as the effort sent pain through her shoulders. He reached forward instinctively, but she flinched. He stopped. Don't worry, he said, drawing his hands back. I'm not gonna hurt you. You need rest. She looked at him, then really looked. A long moment passed before she spoke again. Emily. My name is Emily. He gave a quiet nod, storing the name away like a secret. Nice to meet you. Emily. She said nothing more. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Thomas didn't ask the questions running through his mind. He wanted to know why a young woman in a wedding dress was wandering through a storm in the middle of nowhere. Why her eyes looked like she hadn't slept in days. Why she hadn't run from him the moment she woke up. But he didn't ask. He knew the weight of carrying things you couldn't talk about. He saw it in her eyes, the same way he once saw it in the mirror back when grief was fresh, and words were too sharp to say aloud. Asterisk, he stood slowly, his boots creaking on the wood. I'll fix you some soup. You need something warm in you. Asterisk, she didn't respond, just pulled the blanket tighter around her. As he moved to the kitchen, he heard her whisper something so soft he almost missed it. Asterisk, thank you. Asterisk, he stopped, his back still turned, and a strange ache stirred in his chest. It had been years since someone had said that in this house. Years since a voice other than his echoed in these walls. Asterisk later, when the soup was done and she had eaten. In silence, Thomas offered her the bedroom while he took the old recliner. She refused at first, but he insisted. He gave her space, and she didn't resist. Asterisk, that night, lying in his chair with the fire dying down, Thomas stared into the embers, listening to the storm fade into quiet. Upstairs, a stranger one who had appeared like a ghost in white slept behind his closed door. A woman with no story, no explanation, but somehow her presence had filled the empty air that had haunted the house for a decade. Asterisk, to strangers under one roof, both carrying invisible scars, both lost in ways neither was ready to name. Asterisk, but maybe maybe they didn't need to. Not yet. Asterisk, the days stretched out slow and soft, like the morning fog that clung to the grass before the Texas sun burned it away. The storm had passed, but something had shifted in the air around the ranch, something gentler, less heavy. Emily stayed. Asterisk, she didn't say much at first, but she moved with quiet purpose. On the third morning, Thomas found her out by the chicken coop, awkwardly trying to scatter feed while the hens swarmed her shoes. He watched from the porch, arms crossed, a slow smile tugging at the corners of his weathered face. When she turned and caught him staring, she laughed just once, a small sound, but it echoed like music in the still morning air. Asterisk, from then on, a rhythm emerged. She helped him brush the horses, clean the stalls, peel potatoes at the kitchen table while he stirred soup on the stove. Their words were few but meaningful. They didn't fill the space with noise, they filled it with presence. Asterisk, one afternoon, as they sat outside watching the sun dip behind the hills, Emily finally spoke. Asterisk, I was supposed to get married last week, she said, her voice flat, but her fingers trembling slightly as they toyed with a blade of grass. I didn't want to. It wasn't love. It was expected. My parents said it was a good match, that I'd be taken care of. Asterisk, Thomas didn't say anything at first. He knew the pain of doing what was expected, of being trapped in a version of life that didn't feel like your own. He just nodded slowly, offering her the dignity of her story without judgment. Asterisk, I ran before the ceremony, took my cousin's car and just drove until it ran out of gas. Asterisk, he turned to her, the lines in his face deepening. And you ended up on my porch in a thunderstorm. Asterisk, Emily managed a small smile, not exactly part of the plan. Asterisk, most good things aren't, Thomas said. Asterisk, she looked at him then, studying him like someone learning a new language. What about you? You live out here all alone. Asterisk, he hesitated. My wife Lilashi died 10 years ago, cancer. It took everything out of me. After that, I just stopped letting people in. Asterisk, there was a long pause between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like truth settling between them. Asterisk, Emily broke the silence with a soft voice. I'm sorry. Asterisk, Thomas gave her a gentle nod. Me too. Asterisk, that evening, as they cleaned up dinner, simple stew and cornbread, they worked in quiet harmony. She washed, he dried. She reached for the same plate he did, and their fingers touched. Neither of them pulled away immediately. Asterisk, later, sitting on the porch with mugs of tea warming their hands, the stars scattered across the velvet sky. Thomas spoke again, his voice low and thoughtful. Asterisk, sometimes, he said, we don't get to choose who walks into our life, but maybe that's the point. Asterisk, Emily looked over at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't look like she was running. She looked like she was resting. Asterisk, in the stillness, something unspoken passed between them, perhaps, or simply the recognition of two broken souls beginning to mend, not through grand gestures, but through shared chores, quiet dinners, and the steady rhythm of life lived honestly. The golden sun sank low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet ranch. The grass swayed gently in the evening breeze, and the sky burned with streaks of orange and lavender. Inside the house, the silence was heavier than usual. Asterisk, Emily stood by the front door, a small duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Her dress was no longer torn or soaked, but folded neatly in the bag, a ghost of the woman who arrived days ago. She wore jeans now, borrowed boots, and a look in her eyes that carried more weight than she wanted to admit. Thomas stood near the stairs, arms crossed, his face unreadable. He'd gotten the call that morning her cousin had finally tracked her down. They offered to come pick her up, take her back to the city, help her get back on track. It was the kind of offer that made sense to most people. Family, stability, closure, but it didn't feel right. Not to her. Neither of them had said much since the call. Words, it seemed, had become more difficult the closer they got to goodbye. Emily stepped out onto the porch. The evening air was warm, tinged with the scent of earth and hay. She looked out across the fields, where horses grazed peacefully, the barn casting a long shadow across the pasture. Everything about this place, the stillness, the simplicity had worked its way into her. Thomas followed her out, hands buried in his pockets. His voice was low. "You sure this is what you want?" She turned, eyes glassy. "I don't know what I want." He nodded, as if he understood that more than anyone else could. Sometimes the hardest thing is knowing when to hold on, and when to let go. There was a pause, thick with emotion neither had dared to name. "I didn't plan on staying this long," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just needed a place to breathe, to feel like I wasn't being pushed or pulled." "You had that here," he said quietly. Emily nodded. She looked down at her bag, then out at the sky. "You know, in all my life, no one ever made me feel safe." She turned back to face him. "Not until here." Thomas felt something shift in his chest, like the door he had kept locked for a decade had creaked open just a little wider. His eyes searched hers, unsure of what to say, of what she was really about to do. She looked down at the bag once more, held it in her hands for a long breath, and then let it drop to the wooden planks of the porch. Her hand reached out slowly, deliberately. Thomas stared at it, stunned. Then, gently, he took it in his. No words followed. None were needed. They stood there together, framed by the setting sun. Two people who had lost so much finding in each other not an answer, but a beginning. The kind that doesn't come with fireworks or promises, just a quiet, steady feeling that maybe this was home. 1 year later, the ranch was alive in a way it hadn't been in over a decade. Wildflowers lined the worn wooden porch, sunlight poured over the rolling fields, and laughter floated through the open air like music. Friends, neighbors, and a few curious townsfolk had gathered beneath the wide Texas sky, not for a rodeo, not for a harvest, but for something far rarer out here, a wedding. Mason jars filled with daisies hung from fence posts. Horses stood quietly in the distance, as if they too were witnesses. A gentle breeze rustled the trees, and the scent of honeysuckle mingled with fresh-cut grass. Thomas stood at the end of the porch, dressed in a simple white shirt and clean boots, a small boutonniere pinned to his chest. His hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the weight of the moment. His eyes scanned the porch stairs, waiting. Then the front door creaked open. Emily appeared in a soft, flowing dress knot, a gown not extravagant, just simple and true to who she'd become. Her hair was pinned with tiny wildflowers, and her eyes shone with a quiet confidence. She stepped forward slowly, her bare feet making no sound on the wood. No one needed to guide her this time. There was no storm chasing her, no tears on her cheeks, no fear in her steps, just light, purpose, and choice. Thomas's breath caught in his throat as she reached him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. His eyes, wet with emotion, met hers with the same unspoken truth they'd shared from the start. They had saved each other. The small ceremony was simple vows whispered under open skies, hands held tightly. The past finally laid to rest. As the officiant spoke the final words, the crowd clapped and cheered, and someone released a handful of petals into the breeze. Emily leaned into him, forehead to forehead, eyes closed. He held her gently, as if still afraid he might wake up and find it all a dream. Later, as the guests shared food and music on the lawn, Thomas stood at the edge of the porch, looking out over the ranch. The place felt full again, not just with people, but with life, with laughter, with hope. Emily came up beside him, slipping her hand into his. He looked down at her, eyes glistening, and whispered the words he'd been carrying in his heart. Since that rainy day a year ago, she came to me in a storm, and brought back the sun,